Welcome back to Fresh Economic Thinking. You're with Cameron Murray. I've got my regular co-host Jonathan Gadir with me today for a Fresh Economic Thinking debrief of the election. Jonathan, good to chat again.
Yeah, good to chat, Cameron. I'm happy to talk with you after such a long time. I just want to make sure that I don't pretend to have any special insights. I'm just going to be, just myself.
Why don't we start with a bit of an election debrief? You're living abroad at the moment, in Thailand. How did you vote? Tell me about the actual. We're gonna avoid the horse race of who won and all the seats, and talk about the voting. How did you vote? Was it easy?
Yeah,
Was it hard? Was it painful? Did they fine you?
I don't have to vote as a person living overseas, but I decided that I wanted to. And one of the options was to register as an overseas elector, where they would post me the ballot. And what's amazing is I'm just absolutely stunned by how efficient the Australian Electoral Commission is. Like, there were so many options for me. And what happened was, like, this I did not expect. I did not expect to receive my ballot within like 4 days of the election being called, or it was some very short period of time. Maybe it was a week. By DHL International Courier, where, like, I got a phone call from the courier company to make sure that I knew that they were coming and all that
Wow.
stuff. Like, it was just the kind of thing you'd expect from if you were working for a big company and they pay the first class delivery for DHL. Like, I was just stunned by, well, yeah, they really, really care that I get to vote if I want to. And I guess that's a byproduct of many years, a century of having compulsory voting, or at least in theory, compulsory voting. I was just so impressed, and I'm always impressed. Like, not just by this, but I'm always impressed by the Australian Electoral Commission. Like, compared to other countries, look at how smooth our elections are. Look at how fast things go. And when there's a close seat, there's no fuss. The count goes on until there's a result, and then that's it. End of story. No bullshit. It's great.
Yeah, it's one of those things, and I try to, when I can, point out those boring things that are part of a functioning society that work really well. And this is one of them. Another one I point out at times is the rubbish collection in Australia. It's totally uncontroversial. It works great. And elections are another one. So I guess the question is, if we're doing DHL gold delivery to all our people abroad, how much do you reckon it costs to run a federal election? So in 2022, 15.46 million people voted out of 17 million enrolled voters. How much do you reckon it costs per vote? $1? $10?
I would be. There would be very few voters like me, but yeah, I would be in that category of costing a huge amount.
Mm.
Most people wouldn't cost much. Yeah, everyone's
Well,
subsidizing my vote.
it actually costs not $1 a vote. It actually costs around $30 per
Wow,
vote to run an
wow,
election, between printing the votes, storing them, distributing all the deliveries. Yours probably cost us $150. Thanks
that's right.
very much, mate.
Yeah, yeah, everyone's supporting my vote. Yeah,
But I guess the question is $30 every 3 years for federal election, $10 a year per voter, not per person. So there's only about 16 million voting. I don't know, that seems pretty reasonable to me, to have a highly functioning compulsory voting system where you get your result pretty instantly, right? Same day results as well.
yeah, yeah. And I think like, some people have told me when I say this, how impressed I am by the Electoral Commission. They say, well, maybe they should run the country as well.
Well,
But
I guess, how does it work abroad? Like, um, we're impressed. Lots of countries are democracies and rich countries. We seem to be attracted to US elections because they're so globally consequential. Do you know how we compare in this sort of system compared to elsewhere?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's not a hugely original observation to say that the US is a complete shit show. It's just there are so many irrationalities in the US system, structural just flaws, starting with the fact that it's just run by these clowns in these tiny counties, like thousands of counties, just run their own show, and that the people that oversee the election counts are the secretaries of state of the 50 states, and these are elected political office holders. So that there's a fundamental flaw right there. They don't have a centralized independent election commission. And, when I was at uni, there was the Bush v. Gore fiasco. And where there were like the court ordered a recount in such and such a county, and then this guy who's running the recount in such and such a county, I think it was West Palm Beach County, like didn't realize he needed more time, and so he didn't do the recount fast enough. But the court said, "Oh no, you can't count if you pass the deadline." So the vote was never recounted, and no one seemed to care that the vote wasn't properly counted, even though the presidency depended on it. It was just like, oh, there's a court imposed deadline and there's protesters outside. And, the media was covering the protesters. It was basically who wanted it more, who was willing to stretch the levers of power more. It wasn't about at all
Actually,
just counting the fucking vote. It drove me insane. So,
wow.
um, and I think most Australians have that sense of the complete insanity of the US system. It's not something that
So
we.
having this boring independent body that just exists to do this one function, count the votes really well, make sure everyone who can vote has the chance to, seems to work really, really well.
It
But
does. No fuss. But I mean,
do
even
you-
countries that have like the same as we do, an independent electoral commission, they have other irrationalities that structure the incentives and the sort of structure the process in an unfair way that Australia doesn't have. Like they
what are
have
you
like
thinking?
elections on weekdays. Like that's insane to me. The UK has their election on a weekday.
Oh,
Um,
really?
I mean, we know the US does. Um,
And it's
so
not a public holiday or anything. So now the great thing that's happened sort of since COVID is that this 2 weeks of pre-polling is available. You still have to answer the question, right? When you vote, are you eligible to pre-poll? And you have to answer yes. I don't know what the eligibility rules are, but that just makes it so easy,
hmm,
right? If it was a Tuesday and you had to vote on a Tuesday, it'd be very hard to get everybody on the roll to vote, don't you think?
yeah, for sure. Um,
Yeah. So how does that, I mean, but the UK doesn't have compulsory voting, right? How do you reckon that the history of compulsion to vote has meant that we've got this approach that seems really rigorous compared to elsewhere? What are the incentives that you observe when you tell people abroad, yeah, you
yeah.
have to vote?
I don't know, like,
What do they reckon?
don't you think that, well, in theory, like, it's not actually, like, I know what it says, like, it's compulsory voting, but really, in practical terms, it's compulsory to get your name marked off. You don't, you can put an empty ballot in the box or you can scrunch it up and throw it out. Um, so,
That's
yeah,
true.
it's
So,
compulsory to get your name marked off. So,
but isn't it
um,
like only a couple of percent of people, what do they call it? A donkey vote or something, where you
yeah,
just don't
informal.
mark it or
Well, yeah, because I guess most people, once they're forced to, do it, they do it. And but actually, the informal votes are quite high in some places, like it's 14% or something.
oh wow, I'm
That's not.
gonna
I mean, but still, like, okay, that's 86% of people, which is much higher than other comparable countries. So you're like, in philosophically, I don't like compulsion, and I have a problem with it. But on the other hand, hey, it really works well to structure the incentives in a certain way here, i.e., it's not just crazy, really fanatical people who really care on certain key issues, like in America, that are the ones who need to be catered to by the politicians. The politicians have an incentive to really go broad and cater to the sort of, the broad middle. And I don't think
mm,
that's not like my original observation. I think that's pretty commonly heard in the commentariat class these days. That observation that like that sort of slightly culture war-y, Trumpy stuff Dutton was trying didn't really work because just not enough people buy into it here. Like it's not like, oh, you just have to satisfy that 20% of crazy
Mm.
guys. So
So there's less payoff from mobilizing a fringe base because they're going to vote every time anyway, right? So I'm just looking quick Google search. They reckon it's 2 to 5% of donkey votes between 1984 and 2010. So it's really not many. Most people get a vote that counts into Australian elections. So you think that by the compulsory voting forces us to be a boring middle ground country. Do you think it also means that the two parties end up only differentiating themselves in style over substance because we agree so much on the substance in the middle? Or do you think it's not that powerful? There's still a lot of room. What's your impression? I mean, you're living in Thailand. What are the elections like there in terms of parties? Do they push to the middle, or are there lots of
yeah,
fringe
let's
parties?
talk about Australia first. I don't know. My
Hmm.
prejudice is maybe you'll tell me I'm wrong. My
That
prejudice,
never
my
happens.
prejudice, my prejudice on Australia is that it's hard to make, like, politicians have no incentive to make big changes, to try something bold. There's just no benefit to them to trying it. They would just we just end up tinkering at the edges of everything.
Hmm.
Even
So
though
what
like
what are some
everyone,
examples that come to
oh,
mind there?
like we need to hugely reform the incentives for investing in property to get rid of them, but we
Oh yeah.
won't.
Mm.
We just
Is
tinker
that
at the edges. We give some pointless,
like Bill Shorten's night, was it 2019? He said, "Oh, we're going to reform negative gearing and capital gains tax," and that was too much.
that was
Too
too much.
much.
That in itself is tinkering at the edges, but that was too much tinkering at the edges.
Ah.
So that's my prejudice. Like it's just there's no reason I mean, let's look at how kind of bland Albanese is, just how timid he is in terms of pushing the agenda. Like he just it's that's the reason, and it's paid off, hasn't it?
So
His
I guess
timidity has paid off.
okay. I think you've got a point that incentive's there. Let me put a positive spin on the same point that Australia is a bloody good country, and the last thing we want is an election process that encourages stoking fanatical fringe groups to radically shift what happens because there's a big like cascading event. You get over a certain number of votes, you actually get seats, or you get the power to swing votes in the Senate and things like that. Like so giving small fringe parties that power is not always ideal. I mean, that would be a positive spin on it. Do you think that comes at a cost of competition from new parties and new ideas? Is that the impression you
Well,
get?
maybe. I don't. I mean, you was telling me that actually, didn't you say before that before we started recording that actually we do have bold things happen, like the NDIS.
Well, yeah. I mean, that's the other take on it is that bold things happen if everybody gets on board with it. Like you have to have just a bigger critical mass, which is
Mm,
okay. Maybe you need over 50 or 60% because otherwise a bunch of people will switch from Labor to Liberal or vice versa on net, accounting for all the minor parties. But if everyone agrees, we can get something like the NDIS, which is like, it's going to spend $50 billion this year or some enormous number. And that's like year in, year out to be 55 next year, 60 the next year. That is like an astronomical change. That costs more than the whole military in Australia each year.
mm,
And it kind of just happened and we all went along. And I think the unfortunate part is that it crept up on us. So now winding it back will become the radical change that is hard to implement, right?
yeah.
So yeah, it's hard to know which is better, whether you want to shake things up, like evolution, right? Like the more variation you get, the more chance you have to succeed. But if you've got something good, you don't want to shake it up and take the risk of something that's counterproductive in the future. So
Yeah.
that's a possible one. But one thing that's been interesting in Australia recently, and I'm not sure if you know this data, the share of Australians who aren't voting for the two major parties. I'm going to tell you that in the 80s, so the 80, 83, 87 election, it was about 2 to 3% of people voted outside the major parties. What do you reckon it is this year in the federal election?
Yeah, it was high. It's like 30 or something percent.
Yeah, 35. It's actually the highest vote since the Great Depression for parties other than the major parties. And I think the Great Depression period was, the origin of the Liberal Party and all that realignment of traditional parties was happening. And we're at that point again, but it's crept up for 30 years. In
Yeah, our
the
friend Punter's Politics did a thing on this, didn't he?
Oh, I missed that. What was that?
Yeah. Oh, he played around with these graphics showing exactly how it crept up and how we are, like, the dots on the chart showing the third, the non-major party vote. Yeah, it was very visually interesting. Yeah.
So that leads me to another interesting point that comes up, and I'd like your views on that. A lot of people say, a vote for a minor party is a wasted vote, right? What do you make of that claim? Because it still exists out there. A lot of old people will tell you, what are you doing, you young whippersnapper, voting
Hmm.
for a new party? What a waste. That's
I don't know, just it's a completely unscientific statement. There's no validity to it whatsoever. What makes it like? There's just no objective reality to that statement at all.
Yeah, so good because people keep putting this out there like so there's two responses I have. One is, well, if it's a first past the post, so whoever gets the most votes wins, right? And you vote for one candidate, then yeah, if you vote for if a guy who's not in the top two, then it doesn't change who the top two are, right? Although you're taking it away from one of those top two, right?
Sure.
So even then, it still counts. And secondly, of course, if your guy gets the most votes, they get the most votes and they're elected. Like it's so you should always vote for who you want. But it's also the case with the preferential voting. A lot of people still think that parties give away preferences to other people. But actually, in 2016, this ability in the Senate to do what we'll call group tickets, where you vote for a group and that party group tells the Electoral Commission who they want preferences to go to, that doesn't happen anymore either. So you can actually number a dozen minor parties before you get to a major one. And if one of those parties accumulates votes, they get in. So, I mean, that's potentially why the minor party vote is rising so sharply. I'm looking here, particularly since COVID, there was a big jump from about 25 to nearly 35 in the 2022 election. So maybe that is being internalized now, and people really do want something different.
Yeah.
Don't know.
Um, that reminds me of, like, the bad result is, in inverted commas, of the Greens, um, because the change in votes for the Greens this election wasn't that big, but what happened was, because of our preferential system, the drop in Liberal Party vote, they went somewhere, and um, they either went to Labor or they went to candidates that preference Labor before the Greens, and
Mm.
so you ended up with your mate losing his seat. Oh, what's his name? Max Chandler Mather.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think Adam Bent lost his seat. That was
yeah,
quite an unusual outcome. And you're
yeah,
right. It's based on the reordering of people who maybe didn't want to vote for the Liberal Party potentially, but then didn't want to put the Greens ahead of Labor, um, ending up in this situation. Now, my economist brain says that's okay
yeah. It
because the
is. Yeah,
preferential voting does aggregate. And if you've left the Liberals and want Labor before the Greens, then Labor should get in ahead of the Greens in that seat because that's your preference. Even
yeah.
though you didn't want the Liberals, you wanted the Greens less than Labor. So it's quite good.
And
But
even though Adam Ban and I don't know about the other ones, but I know Adam Ban, was in a first past the post system, he would have won. on whatever it was, 32% or whatever. So I'm okay with that. I think our preferential system's better.
So here's a question. I got a mate, Rob, online. Wheel Reinventors his handle on X. He's come on Fresh Economic Thinking before. He is very big on the idea that the single member electorate, so in the lower house, each area gets one person to represent them. In the upper house, each state gets six to represent them. He's very big on the idea that single member electorates are not very good.
I
That,
agree that they're
oh,
not.
okay.
Yeah,
So,
the best system for a relatively normal, stable country that's not in a war and stuff like that. The best system is what New Zealand and what Germany have, the mixed member proportional, because it gives you the best of both worlds. MMP, you
explain
get
that. Can you
yeah. So
explain the system?
MMP is where mixed member proportional. What you do is you have a proportional representation system, which is great. Like if you're a party that gets 30% of the vote, you get 30% of the seats. But it also has electorates. So you have a local representative, you have a local MP, and essentially parties have a party list and they get topped up with um, extra members who don't have electorates. If the proportion of their vote, like the Greens,
Ah,
if they only get three electorates, but actually the proportion of their vote is 20%,
yeah.
then they'll get topped up from their party list. So their parliamentary representation will end up being 20% of the parliament, and that is the best of both worlds. And I think like the change process in New Zealand was such a bunch of complete freak political events where the political elites were had to actually were did something that was against their own interests and actually allowed this new system to come into play. Like it was a lot of freak events that happened in New Zealand that probably will never happen here in Australia, but they managed to land on a really, really good system.
So so there's no Senate upper and lower house then in New Zealand, is there? It's all just one house proportional to votes, and some of those people represent areas and some are like the Senate. Is that right? Are there,
Oh, whether New Zealand is unicameral or not, that's a good point. I wonder. Well, I
yeah,
know that in Germany, yeah, I mean, even if New Zealand is unicameral, I know Germany has two houses of parliament.
it
How
is in
how the upper
Germany.
house works, I don't know. Yeah,
So
so I don't.
there's only one house in New Zealand. It was abolished in 1951.
Yeah, okay. So
And so
yeah,
it's
so
mixed
yes,
member. So that makes sense because having two, if you've got the proportions right, do you really need this sort of oversight body as well? Because you've already sort of done it by proportion to deal with that geographic disparities amongst lower house representatives. Yeah.
doesn't Tasmania also have a fun system where it's multi-member electorates? So you got more
Oh,
than one member in one electorate. It's got a Hare-Clark system, it's called, I think.
oh
Um,
wow. Oh man, should have done more research on that.
which
Transferable
which
voting,
gives you
proportional
that proportionality.
representation. Yeah, yeah, it does.
Yeah.
Wow. That's an interesting one. So, I'm gonna throw out there um, a little diversion to sort of finish us off on elections. Did you know I ran for election twice?
Oh, you you probably told me a long time ago, and yeah, it rings a bell, but I don't remember the details. Was it for
I
the
went
Greens?
for Independent in 2017 and Sustainable Australia, who try and be a more centrist Greens in 2019 for the federal Senate. Um, I don't know what I got, like 2.5% of the state vote or something like that. So it was okay. But it's interesting when you talk about the incentives of the electoral process, because I thought it's probably worth sharing some of my experience of
Yeah,
that. So as well as winning the votes and being the most charming person, and then obviously the incentive to badmouth everyone else. What's really interesting is that I'll tell you a story. A friend of mine, so I paid to have my flyers delivered to my electorate. There are mail out distribution businesses, right? And I asked a lot of people who should have got it, did you get my flyer in your mail? And quite a few said no. And I thought, well, that's weird. I printed whatever, 10,000 or 15,000, and there's only 10,000 houses in the area. Um, and I thought that was weird. And I met two other candidates from minor parties who told me you can't trust these companies to deliver your flyers because the people who work there are hardcore, rusted on Labor or Liberal and will just throw your flyers in the bin. And so one guy I know who ran for Flux, one of the minor parties, he basically got his money back because he could prove that it wasn't distributed. And another friend had someone tell them that they found their boxes of flyer in next to the rubbish bin behind the shopping center where the
Mm.
delivery company was, and his
Mm.
never got delivered either. And so it's like, I guess what I'm getting to is, yeah, there's incentives in the electoral system, but there's also these weird incentives from really hardcore rusted on people to sabotage, risk their jobs to sabotage other candidates. And to show how crazy that is, you're allowed to cover the electoral center. So wherever the Electoral Commission, hires for the election day with banners, you're allowed to put them on the fence or put them out from 6 p.m. on the day before. But what happens is the parties go and rip off each other's banners and signs during the night. And
Mm.
so in my electorate, in the state election in 2017, it was a very close one. The parties hired security guards to patrol their signs outside the electoral offices from 6 p.m. till 8 a.m. the next day to make sure that other parties didn't come around and rip them off and replace them. So, yes, we've got this great gentlemanly system of the Electoral Commission that makes sure the votes get in, but there's actually this really dirty, vicious sort of crew of very rusted on political people around this that will try and sabotage, and they'll rip down signs at night, and they'll drop, false rumors in the press and
Mm.
all that other stuff. So that's, I think, a very interesting contrast between democracy sausage, AEC, boring and uh, simple elections versus actually behind that, there's a little bit of dirty game playing as well, which
Yeah.
maybe a lot
You
of people
think,
don't
yeah,
expect in Australia.
yeah. This takes me off to the Thailand point a bit, but like culture, the culture of the place, political culture, general societal norms, they are the
Mhm.
most important thing as far as I'm concerned. I mean, obviously the rules of the election are, they're important too, but they take place in a context of what people think is acceptable and not acceptable behavior, or the right thing and the wrong thing to do. And well, in
Mm.
Thailand, um, the elections are suggestions, so shall we say?
All right.
No, they're not. The fact that's like the last time it's happened for the last decade or 2 decades, that the party that wins doesn't actually win, because you have a very entrenched elite class of people who act in solidarity with each other to prevent change. So,
Mm.
the party that won last time, oh, what do you know? They get the most seats. Oh, suddenly there's a legal challenge to the validity of the party. That's happened repeatedly, and everyone knew that it was going to happen because it happens every time. And so
Mm.
that party is dissolved, and so the next election for the same people, or the same change movement has to be formed into a new grouping and a new party with a new structure and so on, and then the cycle just repeats itself because like they use the law as a weapon unevenly,
Mm.
obviously, um, because the same so-called indiscretions or whatever are committed by the other, pro-elite, pro-ruling class parties, but the law is never applied to them. Um, so the winning party is dissolved. They also do. Oh, it makes the Americans look like amateurs. They choose the election. They chose the last election day so that it was when students had their national exams, because students were the biggest voting bloc for change, right?
Wow.
So they just chose the dates that would be hardest for students to vote. they also designed the ballot so that it was almost impossible for someone who wasn't really committed to vote correctly, because you had to like memorize the number, like what number your party was. Like there was nothing on the ballot that properly indicated, you
Oh
know.
my
Yeah,
goodness.
they designed it. It was genius, man. They're the best at screwing over the voting public.
Wow.
And they also did, like, apart from, America has gerrymandering, right? The districts that are designed
Mm.
to, yeah, that's a different type of
Yeah,
doing.
well, I mean, I guess we have a little bit less of that. I think the AEC is involved in redrawing electoral boundaries as well. So that's another win for Australia. Well, I guess I can see now, Jonathan, why you said you were so impressed with the AEC getting you your postal vote, making it easy and quick, having the candidate's name on the ballot, getting it voted, counted quickly. When the experience you've seen sounds like absolute chaos in comparison.
But when
So,
people are committed, they can, like, look at the result. Like, the Change Party last time actually got the biggest vote.
mm.
But then, yeah, the dirty trick started in the parliament too. But that's a whole other story. That could occupy a whole episode. Uh,
Well, let's bring the Electoral Commission review to a close. The horse race outcome was that Labor people seem to want to just return to normal. The small swings away from, for example, the Greens ended up losing them a lot of seats. The huge array of minor parties that still had a record minor party vote didn't seem so consequential to actually who was elected in the end. I think it's a clear signal to the major parties that people are willing to do that. But I guess when we're preferencing, a lot of people will pick their minor party, then retreat to a major party and not do 10 minor parties, which
mm.
makes sense because they're all different because they have different, things they want to change. But yeah, what an interesting time. A lot of people on my Twitter are upset, um, but I actually think it's a totally reasonable, fair outcome. Do you have any final comments?
No final comments. Oh, you can cut this out if you don't want to include it. But the political commentariat drive me insane with their bullshit narratives.
Oh yeah,
Just
like the post
bullshit
hoc
narrative.
narrative.
Just made up bullshit. Like, oh, the Greens have a very bad result because of blah, 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 insert here stupid theory. When you're talking about kind of actually this vote remaining roughly the same, that kind of idiocy. And, um, you know,
Yeah,
uh,
well, everyone wants to tell after the fact, say why their opinion is correct and why the new fact supports their opinion. So, yeah, I've found it very infuriating that what was a pretty bland result that had a few minor changes that through these preferences shifted a few seats a different way. Uh, the fact that that became all these stories, yeah, it was quite interesting to me as well. Are there any that were particularly outlandish besides the
oh,
group?
just everyone, they're all putting their. There was this one sort of, I think it was insiders, but then they are insiders, so they're fulfilling their mandate. Just the
Yeah.
way they talked was like, oh, I feel so sorry for Peter Dutton, or everyone's a human being, and this, like, just their whole frame of reference is like they identify with these people that they cover as though
Mm,
they're, friends, and
mm.
and like Peter Dutton, there are so many obvious signs that this guy was at least corrupt in his previous, when he held ministerial positions. There were so many examples of it, from the au pair example to the
What was
giving
that
the
one again?
just helping out his friends who asked for their au pair, for their French
Special visa or something?
childcare worker to, yeah, be extended, to the giving the $500 billion contract to some buddy who's got a company based in a shack in Kangaroo Island
Oh
to
yeah,
look
that
up the
one.
PNG science. But yet these people they've just completely lost the sense of how that looks to an outside person. Like,
Yeah.
all your compassion and your concern is for, and the way you talk is about, like, the important thing is how these people feel, how, not what they've done,
Yeah, yeah. No, look, it's funny. My sister lives in Peter Dutton's electorate, and there were so many signs up for him. I just thought, oh well, he's the leader. They elect him because he's got a safe seat as leader, and it wasn't true. I don't have any reason for why things happen. I think it's important to avoid that, because you too easily persuade yourself that the story you had was right. So I'm trying to avoid that. But yeah, Peter Dutton, like, this is a general problem I have with opposition parties. Find a leader that is likable. Just in general, like, it shouldn't be hard. If your party is organized, then anyone can represent that party and the views of the party. Just get someone who's a good salesman, who's persuasive, who can say the right things. And I didn't think any of the current political leaders are that type of person, but it doesn't really matter. No one listens to me. But
by the way, I know we want to wrap up.
yeah,
I'm
just
railroading. Do you think that the moment he lost, Dutton, was when he said everyone's going to get back to the office 5 days? Remember that moment? I remember it.
no.
And I think that's the moment he lost the election.
Oh, he wanted the public service to go back 5 days a week, and he just lost them there, did he? Don't know.
Well, I don't remember. I don't remember the way, like, the precise wording. I remember the look on his face, the kind of severe expression, the sort of the sense that, he's going to discipline us by sending us all back to work back to the office. Let me be specific.
Okay.
Back to the office
For
5
office
days.
workers, yeah.
That's when he
Anyway,
lost, right?
we've had our entertainment this election. We've dug into the system. I think we should be very proud of the Electoral Commission and the things we do right. It's always good to take a moment to reflect on that. And I think it sounds like we've finished with having better communicators as leaders for parties so we can actually have a better conversation. Who knows? So I'm always told we get the politicians we deserve. Maybe that's good, and maybe that's okay, and maybe that's reality.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming, Jonathan. Let's talk again.
Thank you. Okay, thanks, Cameron.